Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Let's Be Real, the podcast. I'm Tara.
And I'm Sherry.
And we're here for part 2. Long anticipated.
Yes.
Long waited. We could just dive right into talking
let's
about mommy issues. Look, I'll be straight up. I don't think any of my clients would be offended by this. Some of them are comforted by this. A majority of my caseload is addressing mommy issues.
Oh, mine
as
too.
opposed to daddy issues.
Yes. I think more than we realize, there's a lot of mommy issues out there, and we don't really talk about that a lot.
I
right?
think to just like piggyback basically off the end of our last episode, I think mommy issues can be a little bit more, I don't know if insidious is the right word, but the effects of that can linger because we protect mothers a lot.
Right. We tend to give this idea that moms can do no wrong.
Yes. Whereas
right?
dads,
so that's why
like,
we have to protect. They're so much more important, and dads can't possibly give the same love and nurturing,
right?
Which is actually, I think, a lie. Let's be
honest. It's very
damaging.
Yeah,
it is.
It's the sense of both of these things, daddy issues and mommy issues. The reason they exist is because we kind of like pit these roles against each other.
Right.
Like, oh, that's just dad. He just sits in his favorite chair, watches football, gives me a pat on the head and tells me to go mow the lawn and I'll feel better.
Right.
Mom's got like beads of sweat vacuuming and rocking a baby at the same time, and we just hold those to such extremes.
Right, that mom
parenting.
does everything, and that's not. I mean, we're not saying that moms don't,
of course,
do
not.
things, right? Or taking away any of the nurturing role of a mom. But what happens when your mom is not nurturing,
or she's nurturing to the point where she expects everything else to be forgiven? So she'll nurture. We'll talk about bare minimum again.
Okay.
It'll be, the nurturing and providing for, some clothing when you're an infant, feeding you,
but is that
bathing
nurturing?
you.
I guess maybe defining
to this mother.
Oh,
and then
she doesn't know what the.
And then we show up
is.
on. This has been showing up on my. We're gonna have to ask for a TikTok sponsorship. Goddamn.
Right. Well, I mean,
but then I'll get these videos on TikTok of moms being like, oh, okay, well, I have so-and-so coming to your wedding, and they have like a 20-person guest list just that mom knows. And you're like, I don't know why you would take this away from me. Think of everything I've done for you.
Oh, but that's not nurturing. I'm looking up the definition of, you wonder why my phone's out. We're looking up the definition of nurture.
I guess I'm talking from a place of perception.
Agreed, right? They just assume that that's their role to be that way, right? Care for and encourage the growth or development of, right? Of something other than themselves, right? It doesn't say that here, but
and a synonym is cherish.
Right. And when you cherish somebody or nurture somebody, you're not you're doing that for their benefit as well as your own, I imagine, right? As a intrinsic reason, right? Yeah. But if
being a parent can be very altruistic, but you get a lot out of it.
Absolutely, right? So if you think of the idea of a mom who just went through the motions, right? That's what we're talking about, right? This mom did the diapers, or may or may not, right? I know of mothers that have said, nope, I refuse to change diapers because I'm going to throw up. Dad's got to take care of that.
Okay.
Right? Which your face said that's not normal.
My face said I struggle to think about how that's productive. The same face I would give to a dad who said that, which is much more acceptable, right? Quote unquote acceptable for a dad to be like, oh, I don't do that shit.
Right, exactly.
Really.
But there's moms. I happen to know a personal mom who told me that, right?
Very abnormal, right?
Abnormal. I was like, what?
How do you get away with that?
How do you get away with that for sure, right? And how were you lucky enough to have a dad that was there to do those things as well, right? Or, this idea that we forget how much and how important that nurturing is when you're a child. There's a book called Mother Hunger, which explains this desire to find that nurturing from your mom that you did, that some people did not get, right? And I'm afraid I'm a fan or not, I'm not sure, of the term narcissism, but this is where that comes from. This is one of those things, right? If you did not have a mom or someone in your life, grandmother or somebody, right, who nurtured you, who told you that it was okay to love other people and to care for other people, and that person, more than likely that person was a narcissist themselves because they couldn't think of anybody but themselves,
Right.
or they were severely depressed and they didn't have that in them to be able to do that, right? So either major mental illness, major depression, or personality disorder, right?
Sure.
Not your average person.
No.
Or I don't mean person, but not your person who was nurtured themselves, right? And most of the time we're talking about somebody who wasn't nurtured themselves. So
That's
it's
fair.
just a cycle,
Yeah.
right?
I learned this. I will perpetuate this pattern that I believe.
Exactly. I knew nothing else, right? Or I myself was abused. And so therefore, the idea of nurturing something is scary and I don't know how to take care of that, right? Don't know how to handle it because I shut down all my emotions, right? So if you have this mother hunger for something to teach you, because just because you were raised by that doesn't mean you don't understand that you're missing it.
Okay.
Because personality isn't always affected by your caretaker, right? Your personality along most of the time is your personality. But if you are if you're continually brought down, continually pushed down from your mom specifically, there's something about the mom connection that says, I desperately need this, right?
The expectation of caretaking and nurturing from this person.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly the point that you started with, right? Which is, if I expect this from this person, and it is very much acceptable to expect that from your mother, and instead you get criticism, you get belittled, you get abused.
Right.
You start to hunger for those things. You start to yearn for those things from the very person who refuses to give it to you.
Exactly.
And then in adulthood, that perpetuates into what we could call mommy issues, which in my experience shows up in lots of different ways, just as daddy issues show up in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. I agree.
And it could be in interpersonal relationships. It could be in the way you identify yourself. All of these things.
Well, and, we think about this idea that that's a woman thing, but mommy issues is really a big man thing.
It is.
Right?
Yeah. Because the common denominator is still mom is the provider, is the nurturer, the provider of emotional support and intelligence.
Exactly.
And fostering and cherishing that piece of them.
Right.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I mean, if you have your mom as a young boy who doesn't provide you with that nurturing, caring, is really just worried about her own survival. And I'm not saying that she just happens to be this bitch who doesn't care about anybody. I'm saying that she actually doesn't have the ability, either that she doesn't have it because she doesn't have that skill, and that's a personality issue, or she doesn't, she shut it down for survival, right? For whatever reason. So if you're talking about a man who's never received any nurturing as a child, I mean, even if dad tries to step in and give it, it's still this mom yearning for this person. It's biological that this person did not give it to me. It's a very scary thing, and it's really hard for that person to be able to learn that later, or to be able to to either the idea of giving it to somebody else, or still now you're searching so desperately for it.
Exactly. How are you healing yourself with new relationships or by yourself, or are you continuing this path of potential destruction and hurt towards other people and or yourself? Right. So where does that idea of recognizing what mom was or was not and transforming that into what you need later in life?
Right.
So this is really so I said this already. A lot of my caseload is managing things like this. And it's really interesting spending a significant amount of time helping people mourn relationships that they thought were different. Yes. They thought their relationship with their mother was what they had always hoped for their inner child to have experienced. And I don't experience that very often with people who are dealing with absent or inconsistent fathers. But with mothers, I very much encounter that, where I'm spending multiple sessions, like full time in session, helping them process mourning a relationship that doesn't exist the way they want it to.
Exactly.
They're mourning a relationship of a person, their parent is very much alive. Their mom is alive, but they're mourning her in a different way.
Right, because you're not, it's not just society who's told us that mom's supposed to be that way. It is a biological interaction between the person who birthed you.
Yeah.
Because that still happens. What if your adoptive mom was amazing, but there's still this huge connection between people and their biological parent, their biological mother, more so I think than the biological father. And that's, I don't have all the statistics in front of me, but that's a biological thing, right?
Yeah.
That's that string we've been talking about family. We talked about it during the episode about the holidays, right? And why you go to family functions expecting something you're not going to get.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And we bang our head against the wall and wonder why our mom is not the person we need them to be, because they aren't. They just aren't. And I don't mean all of them, obviously, right? The moms who we want them to be a certain way, when you want somebody to be a certain way, I'm sorry, they're not going to live up to that.
Well, we're talking about, again, we will always come back to this topic of uncommunicated expectations.
Right. But this is a biological, uncommunicated expectation.
Yes. So we keep, and this is, so on the other side of uncommunicated expectations is boundary setting.
And that's
Lord
hard.
help my clients that get boundary setting from me within the first 3 sessions.
It's hard.
It's a doozy.
It is.
I don't enjoy. I always talk about what I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy teaching it because it's really hard. People are like, "What do you mean?"
You have to shut the phone down, Mom. Sorry, can't talk to you anymore. Right? If you're going to be nasty to me, or if that's how this continues, is this going to continue to work that way, then I'm not going to be able to speak to you right now.
But if you believe that your mother is capable of being that loving, cherishing woman, and you set a boundary based on how she's proven herself to act instead of the potential you still have in your mind, that boundary is incredibly difficult to enforce.
Right.
Incredibly difficult because you are worried about offending this person who has done nothing but offend you.
Exactly. And that's the most hurtful. And I think more and more people understand that part, that she can't give me what I need. I think that's a little more apparent than the ones who are for the lack of a better term, the helicopter moms that won't get out of your space, will not let you grow.
Extremes,
right. And those are mommy issues too, for sure. Right. My mom won't leave me alone. My mom herself doesn't have boundaries, or this person, why can't she understand that I should be able to do this myself? That's that's more insidious, I think, because now you've taken away their ability to make decisions.
That's a really good point, because if you're talking about the difference between like an emotionally absent mother and an overly involved mother has convinced you that you absolutely need her. Yes. And any attempt at independence is offensive to her. Whereas the absent or inconsistent mother is, you've developed skills earlier than you needed to be independent from her.
Exactly.
Oh, that's such a good point. That is more insidious, to convince your mom that you don't need her for every little thing as a 35-year-old man or woman can be really tricky.
Because you may really believe that I can't do this on my own unless I tell my mom, or why can't I do this without telling my parents what's going on? Or, there's always going to be that guilt of, I got to tell them everything, some guilt, right? But that's a normal family dynamic, right? But
that could be a culture thing, like a culture, like your family culture.
Exactly. There's a difference between family dynamics or a cultural dynamic versus this person ran amok in one direction or the other, right? This person didn't really feels that we are one person.
Yeah.
And I think that happens more often than, people than we think, right? Because people that want to live through their children.
Yeah. That's a good one. I work with a lot of athletes, and you see that a lot. You see that a lot with, not so much the athletes I work with, because I work with my athletes one-on-one. Okay. I don't really do a lot of family sessions. I have, but typically the athlete really needs that one-on-one time to be brutally honest about what they've got going on. And that's because a lot of the times the parents are imposing their beliefs about what they want, or what they want for themselves, or what they want for their child in the long term.
Right.
And that's not how children work.
I know. I think that people, moms, we just don't realize that. I think some moms are so, I don't mean to bash moms. I mean, I'm a mom, but the idea of knowing where you stop and your child starts is some people don't have that line. There's no division.
What a wonderful way to put that.
So,
like where you as an individual get to be an individual,
yeah.
and where your children get to be themselves, and you get to be a Venn diagram of people,
yes.
Right? Like
right.
You get
because
to cross
our children
over.
are not just another one of us.
Right.
Right? They are that Venn diagram, right? There are two things brought together that we do overlap in certain areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, as much as I'd love to say, or not love to say, I guess, that my children are just like me, I don't want to take all that damn responsibility. But, I mean...
Because there's sometimes where that is very inconvenient.
Right, exactly, right? So when you figure out that, oh, that thing I don't like about you, oh, shoot, that's me,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why it annoys me so much.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they're a good mix of both people, or sometimes they're really a lot like one so much that it offends the parent.
That's really funny.
So that's hard too, right? And I think that some of the nurturing issues might come from that too. What if you're a child of rape, or what if you're a child of the time period where you were born was not good for your mom?
Yeah.
So,
well, then we can definitely touch on more of generational trauma, or those kinds of seeds that are planted in terms of your parents' trauma and how it manifests within you. This is a conversation I'm in the very early stages of exploring with my own family, specifically my cousins, because we're all in the same age group. We're very close in age. And it's 2 girls and 1 boy. And my girl cousin and I have a lot in common with how we experience certain things. And then my boy cousin doesn't understand what the fuck we're talking about.
Well, that might be a different reason.
But it's the way like women are treated in my culture, in our culture, or expectations that are put on us as women and females, and he doesn't get those. But he probably experiences a bunch of stuff that she and I could not understand.
Of course, right.
And we also are of different parents.
Right, exactly.
So we have our own little streams of what's going on that's becoming new to us as we are becoming adults and running our own shit, owning things, buying property, having families, whatever the hell I'm doing in the background, but that's fine.
The scariness of saying that I'm the adult, right? Where's my mom to do all this for me?
No, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've always been maybe a little more independent in the sense of that's not, I don't look at my mom and say, oh, what are you going to do for me? Right. Because my mother raised me to be independent. She's an independent woman. But
relatable,
right? But still married for many years. I mean, many, many years, over 50 years they've been married, and still to be pretty independent and dependent, if that's possible, right?
In some ways, yeah, of course.
But that's how I was raised. I was given nurturing, but I was also told in the way they raised me that yes, you can do this yourself too, right? I showed you, now go do it. Versus let me do all of this for you. And that's also a generational thing too, right? I'm at the end of Gen X. That the beginning of the Gen X, that's where they all talk about they were raised by wolves and stuff like that. Maybe that part of the generation has more of a my mom wasn't there because she went back to work or she did things, and I was missing her. And so I think in that there's a lot more mommy issues in my generation.
I could see that. I could definitely see that. And it's interesting because now these things that we're talking about with daddy and mommy issues, they're changing, right?
Yes.
The meaning and significance is changing. They're still showing up, right?
Right.
But fatherhood looks different. Motherhood looks different. We've got the most working mothers we probably have ever seen in this country, right?
Oh, for sure,
and that trend is only increasing. The irony of we're probably seeing more stay-at-home fathers than we've ever seen as well.
Agreed, right?
Which
somebody's got to do something, right?
I'm pro both of those trends.
Right.
As long as they're productive for the children you are creating.
Absolutely.
That's the hardest piece that I'm seeing. And right now it's just a hard I think we're in a time where it's a really hard argument for parenting. Like
Right.
it's really difficult.
Right.
And that's just with, how do I want to put this? With intact marriages and intact families.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, with so many people being raised by two parents separately, that's a huge dynamic of the back and forth. And with my children, they were raised, half of their life with both of us, and the other part of their life at this point between both of us, back and forth, right?
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother dynamic, whether you have another mom in that house too. Like my children have a stepmom, or my kids for a very short time had a stepfather.
Yeah.
But like that dynamic of going back and forth is very different as well. Like, are you the mom that has to call every 5 minutes when your kid is gone? Are you the one that I have to control everything while my kid is gone?
Right.
Or are you totally aloof?
Exactly.
So where does that, so
yeah. And
it's a lot. I think it's a lot more on the mom side. Sorry, ladies. We have a big void to fill, or a big void to, like, when we date men or marry men, we as women, because that's what we feel like that's what our job is, to nurture and teach. So we feel like it's our job to nurture and teach our husbands, but it's really not.
No. And then women, in terms of when a relationship ends, right? Or a marriage with your child's father ends, and then how dare you go back into the dating pool?
Right.
I think women get shit on so much for that. And then
Yeah.
I can't, and I'm not saying that comparatively to men. I'm only saying from my experience.
We just expect men to go back so quickly.
I don't know. I honestly don't know what we expect, because when it comes to what we're almost touching on, which is like men's rights as well. Like, I'm very pro family court, really considering the damage that they do to fathers.
Absolutely.
I'm very offended on behalf of men when it comes to family
I am
court.
as well. I have a lot of fathers that, at a certain point, they give up. And it's not because, and moms too, right? Because it's not just that they give up. It's their kids have now been put in a position where they have to make a decision, because the mom is using all of her power to take that kid away.
Right.
And now at some point, if the kid's involved and the kid's saying, no, I want to be with mom, because when your mom's saying, oh, your dad's bad and your dad's this and your dad, they're going to they're going to either see the truth, which doesn't happen till they're older usually. They're going to go after mom.
Yeah.
They're going to be, mom needs me, mom this, right?
Back to mommy issues, because that's highly problematic.
Absolutely. So now your dad is at some point like, how many times can I go back to court? Nobody's given anything. Everybody's saying that, oh, the kid belongs with their mom. But in the state of Florida, it is supposed to be shared responsibility.
Okay.
50-50 is supposed to be
the default.
The default, right? And then you got to prove otherwise, I guess. But it's not too hard. It's not too hard to prove, daddy's an asshole. But why is it so hard to prove that mom is not?
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating, because while, yes, we have scientific research that shows for younger children that there's the biological connection there, right? As soon as you hit like that beginning of abstract thinking for these kids, I don't know what the biological root is here. This is just purely anecdotal from the work that. No, we're not bringing him into this. You can leave him out of this conversation. But as soon as that abstract thinking starts to come in, and this is just me working with middle schoolers that had an immense amount, a lot of trauma in the population I was working with. Right. But with that also comes so much self-awareness, sometimes in the wrong direction, and a lot of early abstract thinking and critical thought. So critical thinking, I was all about fostering. I don't know how, take a drink, I guess, every time I say that on the show, because I say it a lot. It's like my one mission for kids. But they just know so much, and they know how to argue so well and productively that these are the points where we're really starting to think okay, well, who do you want to stay with? What makes sense
Right.
for you? What do you want? Okay, dad's a firefighter, so he has irregular hours, which the court doesn't like. But you also want to be a firefighter, or you want to be involved in the same organizations that he volunteers for, or you want to do these things at the firehouse, which is absolutely
Right.
a reasonable thing that kids can do.
Absolutely.
But what if we don't have the resources to provide that to the court? Or what if, mom has a very different argument and
Mhm.
her voice just automatically bellows over everybody else's?
Right.
And that's tragic. That's really
Right.
upsetting to me. It's definitely a soapbox of mine, is when it comes to family court and inequality in family court.
Yeah, I agree. Family court, for the lack of, we were trying to take something that should be a cooperative situation, and it's adversarial. And so anytime you add a court into something, it's just automatically, it's an adversarial system.
That's a really fair point. Yeah.
So you try to put like this, let's bond and make a connection. Well, they honestly don't give a shit, because it's like, did you do my only jurisdiction
Mhm.
is to say what you did against the law or not against the law, right? So, well, the guy's a jerk and he is a narcissistic a-hole, but
That's not criminal.
that's not criminal, unfortunately. Fortunate for some, but unfortunate for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's when it comes to parenting, right? So you just have to figure out as a mom, okay, this guy is a total narc here, and I have to play the game in order for my kids to get what they need,
Yeah.
right? So, but that's if you have the wherewithal to be able to handle that.
Exactly. So all of this to say, when it comes to mommy issues specifically, just like daddy issues, they manifest completely differently. It's not fair to paint anything with the same brush, which we say
Absolutely.
all the time, because it's true.
It is true, right? And what I may think of as a mommy issue may really be the daddy issue, or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Or the poor, this is what I've always said to my kids. I love you. I did the best I can. And someday you're going to have lots to tell your therapist about, right? So, I mean, no matter how great or how bad you are as a parent, they're going to have something to say about you did this wrong, or this triggered me. Take a sip, because I hate that word. This triggered me to think this way, or I can't make any decisions right because of this, right? Even though the average person would look at that and go, how did that affect you?
Yeah.
But it just does, whatever it may be.
And it's allowed to. It's
It
valid.
is.
That's absolutely valid. But that was a really good point, too, of evaluating. Well, I didn't have my dad in my life, so I'm assuming I have daddy issues. But mom absolutely made everything about her, and now
I'm a
asks for
victim.
reparations for everything that she did for you.
Right. Well, that's the worst, right? How many times have you heard, and it's usually on TV, I mean, but like how many times you say, about how my labor was this long, and, I mean,
did all these things.
I did all these things for you, and that becomes a trend.
As if I chose this. I'm
Right.
speaking as if I'm Swabby. This is not about you. That's my mom saying. This is not about you.
Well, honestly, I didn't, there's a time when I really desperately wanted to be a mom and I wasn't able to.
Yeah.
And then it just happened, right? I did all the things to force it to happen and it didn't. And then it happened on its own. So I didn't necessarily choose to be a mom. I mean, I desperately wanted to be a mom, but I wasn't the deciding factor of whether I was actually going to be a mom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other than the act that I participated in.
Sure.
Right? But there's a lot of people who participate in that act and say, no, we're not doing this. And it, right? And it still happens.
It does.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely.
Anyway, so that's where I think a lot of mommy daddy issues stem from. Sometimes, I didn't really, people will say, I didn't ask for this.
Yeah. That's always a fun conclusion to come to in session. It's like, and don't forget, you didn't ask to be born, when she decides to rub that in your face.
Right? Exactly.
I'm not telling you to use that argument, but you just get to remember it.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. I'm remembering an episode we did a long time ago where I think the title was Who Do We Blame?
Exactly.
So now we just got to flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, we get to decide who is our, where does our behavior come from and who do we blame? No. But really, we can say I understand, but I can't blame somebody else right? I mean, unless we're talking about trauma, I can say, if this, because it's not my life, right? If my father beat me,
Mm-hmm.
I can say my trauma, I blame it on him,
Sure.
of course, right? But, the way we were raised,
Mm-hmm.
nobody, and it's like everybody always says this, no one was given a book, right, on how
Yeah.
to do this. And then it's not the same as following a recipe, right? You're given a human being in your hand, and you're told as a mom that you're supposed to fall in love with this thing the minute it pops out of you. That it caused 9 months of holy hell, what happened to my body, and now I'm
Yeah.
supposed to love it, right? It doesn't necessarily, no matter how desperately you wanted it,
Right.
it doesn't necessarily mean that clicks like that. So, and for some people, it doesn't click that
High
way.
expectations
Right.
for that feeling of parenthood.
Yeah.
When I did parent coaching or even just parent meetings,
Mm-hmm.
I would remind parents that these are usually the ones that are really self-conscious about what they are or are not doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're asking the right questions. So bless
Yeah.
them. I would remind them that there's no right way to parent. There are a whole lot of wrong ways.
For sure.
There are, yeah. And we're not just talking about the bare minimum that we talk about, but
Right.
there are a lot of things that may be ingrained in us because of our family culture,
Mm-hmm.
country of origin and that culture, or personal beliefs. We can get into the institution of religion or education or any of those things. And some of those things do damage.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not easy to know all of those things. I would maybe make an argument that it's impossible to know all of these things.
I think it is.
You
Right?
don't
How
know
do
what
I
you don't
know. What I exploded that day. Like, I did not have the ability to emotionally regulate.
Right.
How do I know whether that's going to come back at any age, right? If my kid's 2 and I freak out and I'm having a mental breakdown, or at least at the moment I feel like I am. Sometimes your kid's going to remember that, sometimes they're not. And
yes.
or even take it on as a trauma. And then you have, for those that don't, you're like, oh, thank you, Jesus, right? That passed. And hopefully we didn't destroy them too bad, right?
This is reminding me, just as a sign off, unless something else comes up, I've been seeing a flood of podcasts that are inviting parents with their podcasting child to talk about what was going on. One of them is a South Asian family with holy shit.
I bet, right?
Oh God. The level of like gaslighting and the elevation. This is why I don't I couldn't watch it. This is why I don't do families. This is why I don't work.
It's rough, right?
It was a lot. And it's not just the cultural piece of it. This happens with American second, third generation families too.
Of course, right.
But that is a culture I know pretty well, and that hurt my heart a lot. And then I saw another one this morning that I don't know their country of origin. They seemed like an American family, and they were completely like, what are you talking about? We didn't slap you at the dinner table. And like the podcaster's like, what are you and like they had someone in the room that was like, didn't we talk about, you were there? Like they were children, and parents were just like, that didn't happen. And then all of a sudden mom was like, that was one time. And I'm like,
see, because mom blocked that shit too.
Right.
Mom's traumatized by the fact it happened.
Right. And I don't want to get too deep into this because I also don't know these people, but I do know the people I'm about to speak to exist. They're not traumatized at the fact, like, how could I hit my child? They're traumatized of, I don't want anyone to think that I could hit my child.
Yes, because we've demonized that, right? And I'm guilty of that, right? Before I had children, before I understood the stress of having kids.
Yeah.
Not that I would beat the crap out of my kid just because I'm stressed, but the idea is that we're really quick to say, oh my God, how dare you do that? And people who are not emotionally regulated, which is most of us, let's be honest,
right?
How many of us have full control of our faculties when rage comes? When you have no sleep, your kid is like a major pain in the ass at that moment, and you cannot function. It just, I'm not saying that you had to throw them down or anything like that, but if you pop some mouth or popped a butt, I mean, but if I was to say that in front of some of my other friends, or if I said that with my other social work friends who may not have been moms, I would have been afraid someone was calling my ass for sure.
Well, I guess in my perspective, because I'm open to a parent being a client of mine and telling me that that happened, I would be emphasizing not shame, obviously. It happened.
It happened, right.
And your relationship with your child may not be the same after that. But what do you do to repair it? Because if you're going to pretend, if you're going to respond in that way and pretend it didn't happen,
exactly, that's
and it just
the problem,
excuse
right?
yourself,
Right.
then you're going to be dealing with some long-term consequences that
Right.
may not even show up for another 25
Yeah.
years. You know,
I mean, I think this is a conversation that we probably could go on for a very long time. So I'm gonna say that I think we're good on the mommy issue.
we'll defer. Yeah,
We've turned into all kinds of parenting levels, but you know what? Just so you know, you're gonna screw your kid up no matter what.
Yeah.
So mommy issues or daddy issues, they're gonna happen. So don't be offended when your kid says it,
Yeah.
unless you know, hey, you did it wrong. You did wrong. So if you did wrong, just admit it.
that's the reparative piece of
Right.
it.
Just admit it. You know what? I didn't know any better.
You
Or
don't
you
have
know
to
what?
gaslight your child into believing
Right.
that never happened. They're saying it's a
Right.
part of their story. We get facts wrong all the time. What's useless is arguing with people who believe that they are facts. That includes your children. That includes our parents. Let it be and be like, holy shit, I can't believe you remember it that way. What do we need to do?
Right. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I had completely lost my mind and I was hoping that that didn't stick with you.
Mhm.
But you know what? Obviously it did. And I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be.
I mean, what else can you do? I mean, I can't go back and change it. So the idea is you have to say, hey, I'm not perfect.
Mhm.
Admit it. Admit that, you know what? You're right. Your facts on this, even though I may think, oh, that was ridiculous. I just smacked you on the butt. Why are we still talking about
Mhm.
that? Right. But it bothered them for a reason.
Right. And you're right. This is definitely its own episode.
Yes.
Maybe we bring in a guest that's also a parent because I'm not sure our
No, but I
dialogue will
think
be
that
rich.
But I think that ours is rich in the sense because you're not a parent. You choose not to be a parent and you don't want to be a parent, right? We
Mhm.
talked about choosing, right? And make sure you take that choice to that decision to make that actual choice.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, but I think it's fair because we're both coming from a different perspective, and
Yep.
that's what this is. If we just say, Tara, you're totally right.
Yeah.
Or Sherry, you're totally right. That's
Right.
not always the case, right? I'm coming from a different perspective than you, and that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is my belief system is rooted in theory. I can't say
True.
that
just like mine was
my lid
before I
has-
had kids.
I can't say that my lid's ever popped off and I've, gotten that close
Right.
to it.
I'm going to give an example of pre-kids, post-kids, and then we could be done. But when I was a social worker in elementary schools, if a kid came into my school and I happened to see a bruise anywhere that was obvious, I would have asked them and I probably would have called.
Okay.
And I don't mean just a basic I fell on the ground bruise, right? Like normal kid kind of bruise. But once I had my second child, people came over to visit the baby.
Mm-hmm.
My 18 months old was running around, ran into the corner of the cabinet with his face, giant bruise
Yeah.
immediately.
Right.
Right? Looked like really somebody punched him in the face. Now, if I had been the social worker somewhere around there, I for sure
Yeah, you would have
been like,
hesitated.
that doesn't happen. Bruises don't happen. That's like the lady who says she runs into a door, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's
yeah.
actually abused, right? So when I had my own kid, I was like, oh, thank you, God, my child is not in daycare or doesn't go to preschool at this point. Because I was so afraid that someone would see him and be like, you did that to your kid, or your husband did that to, or who did that to your kid? Right?
And I know a lot of
he
people,
did it to himself, right?
I know of parents that have taken their kids to the ER for broken bones, and maybe they had another broken bone like 3 weeks before that.
Right.
And there's a flag in the system, right?
Right, exactly.
But we also don't want to police our kids to not play and experience the world.
Right, but we have. That's what we've done, right? That's the other,
Yeah.
the helicopter.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm done.
I'm happy to see some little like half rock climbing walls in the playgrounds. That makes me happy because I didn't see
Let's
those for
bring
a
it
while.
back, right? You go to like I went to Ireland and they had the most amazing playgrounds, like some dangerous looking stuff. But you know what? Those kids.
Okay, but we
having
also
so much
had
fun.
we also had metal slides that would roast me like a rotisserie chicken in the summer in Texas.
For sure. Like I lived in South Florida, so I
and they would
understand
make that they would make that awful noise while you slid down them and you were
That's
wearing
just
shorts.
skin ripping off your legs.
That's exactly what that was. Because, the skin is the fatty part of the meat. So, you got to...
Oh. Well,
if we're making a
time, mine
rotisserie
was-
chicken.
Yes, I love it. Okay.
Anyway, we're getting a little delulu again. So
Yes.
I think it's time to wrap.
That's really part of me. So anyway.
As always, please like all of our content, follow the podcast, follow us on YouTube. We're picking up a little traction on there, but we're having a lot of fun posting like the entire episode for you guys.
So share it with your friends. Like, hey, you know what? There's these crazy girls that talk about mental health stuff, and we try not to be too boring. But if we're boring, tell us. Like, hey, spice it up a little bit.
We can change.
Yeah.
I will change for you.
Uh-oh. Write it in, girl.
Joking. But that's why we put out the reels and the TikToks for you guys to send them out, share the word. It sounded very churchy. Don't do that.
Oh, goodness.
Not the word.
Okay.
I want to redact that. To support the show, you can use our affiliate code Let's Be Real at copenotes.com. We get 10% off for any of those daily text messaging affirmation services. We're really hyped to be working with them. So support us, support them, support yourselves.
Right. If you're looking for positive affirmations or things to just make you feel good, right? That you don't need it from someone else. Check that out.
Yeah, that would be a really good resource. But with that, until next time, you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.